Hello, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us live. Thank you to anybody who will watch this interview later as a recorded interview. I would like to start with a message before we actually start the interview. A message to anybody who is going to watch this interview and anyone who is watching us live now. Much of the world is undergoing a crisis. It's facing a crisis as a result of COVID-19. We hope that more and more of us receive the support that we require in this period. We commiserate with everyone who is bereaved and with everyone who has suffered any other loss. We hope that this pandemic is brought under control very soon, and we hope for a future that is healthy and a future that we have a chance to build together. Thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you very much, and we hope that we all stay strong and we all have a chance for a future that we can build together. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much again to our for joining us in the next African Composers interview. Today, we have someone who is not a composer, unless she will tell me that she is. But we have someone who is a performer. She plays a musical instrument, the bassoon. She potentially plays more, but we'll find all that out today. But she's here now with us, and I will invite our guest for today to introduce herself. Thank you very much for joining us. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for such a nice message and for opening with that nice, warm greeting. My name is Midori Sampson. I'm a bassoonist and an educator and an activist in the US. And my primary position right now is I'm working on my doctorate in music performance at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But I also play in the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra, which is a small orchestra in my town. And I'm a professor of bassoon at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Like you said, I'm not an African composer, and I'm not a composer at all. But I am a fan of African composers. I'm a collaborator with African composers, and I hope to be a champion of African composers in my career.
Okay, nice to meet you. Good. You've taken us right into the question of African composers and your relationship with the works of African composers. But before we talk about that, can we delve a little bit into your years of experience as someone who performs on the bassoon? Can you take us back to your earliest days and for how long you've been doing this? And perhaps you can tell us why the bassoon as well. It's such a beautiful instrument. It's very interesting to listen to as part of Baroque or old music, if some people call it old, early music, that's the word. So tell us about that, your years of experience, why the bassoon, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm. I started playing the bassoon when I was 11, but it was something that I wanted to do much before that. I'm not sure how I got exposed to one. I mean, they're kind of strange and they're kind of hard to encounter. They're not the most common, but somehow I encountered one, and from a very young age like 5 or 6 or something, was like, that's what I'm doing. I have to do that thing for the rest of my life. I think it had to do with the sound. I think it had to do with how strange it looks on stage. I've always been small. I've always been short. So I wanted something that could announce my presence and could make me feel huge when I'm on stage. So I started playing it when I was 11 and fell in love and found such a voice for myself on this instrument. I went to college for it. I went to Juilliard in New York City. And then I went to get a graduate degree in Texas at the University of Texas at Austin. And the whole time kept falling deeper and deeper in love with the instrument. And I played in a training orchestra with the Chicago Symphony for 2 years. And that's when I decided to pursue my doctorate and hopefully someday be a pedagogue and a teacher and a performer that contributes a lot to the field of the bassoon and advancing it. Like you said, it's known for older music, but I want to contribute something that makes it really great for new music also.
Okay, it's interesting. Thank you very much for taking us on that journey. You mentioned studying at Juilliard, which is quite prestigious, especially in your part of the world, the USA, and among musicians generally in different parts of the world. And you mentioned Texas as well, University of Texas. What did you encounter while you were at these institutions around African compositions?
Nothing. um, well, part of my motivation for wanting to champion African composers and work with African composers was that I was not exposed to it. Music from Africa. It's not really, I don't want to generalize too much, but it's not in the curriculum that I was taught in the US, and that's a shame and that's wrong. So I wanted to make sure that even if that remained true in curriculum and in institutions, my students would encounter music by composers from Africa. And we'll talk about my commissioning project, but by commissioning works, I can increase the chances that my students will be exposed to music from Africa that's for the bassoon. I'm really interested in giving African composers visibility in the United States and in a classical music concert. But because there wasn't really repertoire that I could find, it meant that I had to commission it myself and make sure that I was really acting against kind of the racism that is at play when we don't expose audiences here to African music and to African composers.
Okay. And you talk about commissioning. Was this expensive for you to do? Because there are those who will withdraw from commissioning because of the costs. For those who don't understand, and I might explain this incorrectly, feel free to correct me, but commissioning is where you put out a call for music, or you contact specific composers or a composer to compose a work for you, and there's actually an exchange of money. So it's not usually a free thing where you just tell someone to compose for you. So was this expensive for you?
So I applied for a grant and got funding from the Training Orchestra in Chicago, the Civic Orchestra of Chicago. I applied for a large grant to get that money, and they loved the idea of these works being added to the repertoire. So they sponsored it, and that's how I was able to pay collaborators.
Okay, all right. So you received support around that as well. Mm-hmm. Okay. I just want to dwell on your interest in this particular group of people or this continent. I mean, there are other continents. Was this the only continent that you identified as not being represented, or there was a gap and it was just around this particular continent? What happened?
Well, it was particularly interesting to me to focus on Africa because I think in the US, in media portrayals and in pop culture portrayals, the way we talk about people and artists from Africa is, I think, some of the worst depiction we see in the US. And so it was important to me to act against that. I also have an organization called Tradewinds Ensemble, which we teach music composition to children around the world. We use composition because we think it's the best way to uphold a child's musical voice and to celebrate their individuality. And so we partner with a school in Nairobi and a school in Arusha, Tanzania. And we also have worked in Haiti, in Chicago, in Detroit, where the students we work with are Black or of African descent. And so it was very important to me to be able to perform for them works by composers who they could more reasonably identify with than, say, Mozart or other common composers who write for my instrument, the bassoon. And that's why I wanted to focus on working with composers from Africa.
Okay, that's really interesting. Because, I mean, well done, for the work that you do and the specific interest and the interest you've taken in African composers and supporting their work and commissioning them, which is taking it, quite a step further. because it's not quite common to get paid for your work as a composer, and for someone to put in the effort to get a grant and then to commission works. Well done. I was just wondering about something you just said about working on music that the people around are more familiar with. Growing up as a Nigerian, I can tell you that many of us are we're familiar with the works of African composers, perhaps around choral music in certain parts. There are those who are familiar with orchestral, but it's mainly choral, especially in my country, Nigeria. But we are quite familiar with the works of composers from other parts of the world. So I'm wondering because sometimes there is a battle to be fought, but sometimes there isn't a problem, there's a solution looking for a problem. If the people are already familiar with the Haydns of this world, the Mozarts, the Handels, Palestrinas, all these composers, are they asking for works of African composers? You've mentioned that you're a champion. What are we championing? I mean, it's sort of similar to what I'm doing around putting the names of African composers forward. But to be fair, many of them are very well known in Africa, perhaps not outside of Africa. But yes, I'm just wondering, these children probably already know many composers, but perhaps not African composers.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to, it's so dangerous if I presume so much because I have white skin. So I'm very...
Don't worry. I think ideas matter. It's the opinion of the person rather than what the hue they turned up in. But listen, I wouldn't presume for you either. So please feel free to say what you want.
Okay, so I, from what I observe, if a child doesn't see themselves on stage and doesn't see someone who looks like them or who comes from their tradition making music, it might signal to them that they are not invited to also make music. If a child who is from Africa only sees composers who are like Haydn and Mozart and from a European tradition, what if it signals to them that that is the only kind of person that's invited to make music? And so I don't want to perpetuate that kind of thinking because, of course, everyone's invited to make music. Everyone is invited to be a composer. So maybe if a child sees someone from their country who looks like them making music, maybe they will start to think, I'm invited to do this thing also.
Okay. Yes, I completely appreciate what you're saying. Okay. And as somebody who has spent some time in a foreign country, I completely understand where you are coming from. What I will say is, as an African, I don't typically engage. I don't recognize that. I cannot, I don't understand when people say things like that, because where I come from, we are the ones on stage. We are the ones leading the country. We are the ones doing the judging. We are the prisoners. We are the police officers. We are the drivers. We are everything. So, and I've never felt that. So I'm wondering if perhaps if the message is meant for the people who are in your country rather than Africans. The people in your country, okay, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Because the schools that we work at in Chicago and in Detroit, it's intended for those children also mostly. And when that's why I focused on performing the recital in the United States. Okay. Instead of performing the recital in Africa, because it would have a different context there. Yes. It would be perhaps to celebrate a collaboration mostly, yes, or to celebrate like a meeting of voices instead of the visibility part. Yes. Yeah, so it has different context and it fills maybe different needs depending on the place that these works are performed.
Okay, I understand. Okay, well done. All the same, well done. Okay, so let's move on to you now as a performer and somebody who commissions the works of African composers. You've talked about the fact that you commissioned already. We've already started talking about that. So you recently commissioned several African composers to compose for the concert, which is tagged Bassoon Music from Africa. And you performed them during a recital that you gave. Let's talk a little bit about that recital. Just tell us the story of the recital and talk around the subject of that recital and the commissioning, the entire story. How did you meet the composers? How did it go? Go on.
Yeah, so this was a project I started dreaming about it in 2017, and it became a project that I focused on in the 2017-18 year. When I was in Chicago and when I received funding from the Nagani Music Institute at the Civic Orchestra of Chicago. So leading up to this, I had no idea how to find these composers. I knew that they had to exist, but I wasn't yet connected with a resource like yours, or really kind of anyone that I knew. So I was doing lots of emailing, just asking, and most of the time getting no response at all. I made some phone calls, like in the middle of the night when I knew it was daytime there, and I just kind of reached out and asked, "Is this interesting? Do you know anyone?" And I found the most amazing people to collaborate with just by reaching out and asking. And they come from such a variety of backgrounds, and the way they come to music is so diverse, which meant a more diverse set of works that could be performed too. And so collectively, I got back 8 pieces by 7 composers, and they fit perfectly into this 45-minute recital that could be performed anywhere. I performed it for the first time in Chicago, reprised it then at the university where I teach, the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and then also at the university where I attend school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I want to do it everywhere, and I want to keep doing it. The recital looks maybe a little different than a typical recital. Usually I would say some words when I'm performing and just kind of introduce the music or give the audience a little bit of context, but instead I don't say anything. Instead, there's a video that plays behind me, and the composers give brief introductions through a video. And then while I play the piece, a portrait of them is up on stage so that everyone can see what they look like, and see them as a person who wrote this piece that I'm playing now. And I think that's all I need to say. I want to say everybody's names. Mohamed Denke is from Sierra Leone. Grace Bernard, who you know, is from Nigeria. Job Ivan Tezigatwa is from Uganda. Johnny Balonji from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Njabulo Fungula from South Africa. Peter Nyabuto from Kenya, and Godwin Sato also from Nigeria. Those are all the people who contributed to this, and the people who kind of helped me understand how to play their music and bring it to life, and who I continue to celebrate by playing this recital as much as I can.
Okay, well done. Thanks for the backstory on the commissioning project. And wow, to hear that you've actually performed the works more than once, that's absolutely brilliant. And putting the voices, including their voices in your performance, it's also a very good thing. Let's talk about, I'm going to skip to the topic of interpretation now, because you mentioned involving the composers perhaps through video where they can explain the piece rather than you talking about the piece, and then you have their photographs there. Did you have any concerns about interpreting the works? I've spoken to an African composer about this, and I thought about interpreting an African performer, and I was wondering about any challenges he faced when performing the works of African composers as compared to other composers from other parts of the world. What were your concerns? Did you have any around interpreting the works?
Of course I did. Of course I did. So specifically, a couple of these pieces were exciting challenges for me because, so Job's piece, he has me sing in it, which he has me sing in Swahili, and it's not only a new language for me, but I singing is not great for me. So that was a cool challenge, and I had to figure out how to say the words, how to go from like bassoon mouth to singing mouth, and not be very nervous in the face of that. Also, Njabula's piece has a lot of extended techniques, which are sounds that you don't expect to hear coming out of the bassoon. So his notation was very interesting because he had all these different ways of notating these sounds that aren't typical, that you don't see them all the time. So that was a very interesting interpretive challenge. And then rhythms were new to me. I had to sit down and spend a lot of time like saying rhythms and conducting rhythms and trying to figure out how to execute them correctly on the instrument. But like Grace's piece, in preparation to play that, I did a lot of listening to Igbo music, and because she was writing from that tradition. So I started to listen to Igbo music and like try to figure out form and the way I would hear people singing, like if it was a solo singer versus a group. And I was trying to connect some of those ideas to her writing. And that applied to several of the pieces also.
Wow, that's fantastic. Care about the work people put in, either as composers or as performers, to making sure that they deliver an outcome, an expected outcome, and deliver to the highest standard. So well done to you. You mentioned notation. I was going to ask you about that. How were the pieces notated in certain parts? Well, where I grew up anyway, we grew up using solfa notation mainly, rather than staff notation. And you talked about the extended techniques and the presentation of the music, notation of the music. Let's talk in detail about the notations. How were they notated? Was it new? Was it different? Was it challenging? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so when I went into this, I didn't want to exclude any of that. So I said very clearly to everyone, like, you notate this how you want, and then we'll work together to like turn it into a language we both understand. I didn't want for notation to be a limit for anyone. So, but what I ended up receiving back from everyone was staff notation, and it was very familiar to me. I didn't really have a notation barrier with anybody, which I was a little disappointed about. I was excited to like try to learn some entirely new system, but that's okay. It can still happen. But
absolutely.
But the one piece with the extended techniques, there were some interesting, there were sounds that he actually wanted to put in there, and I kind of had to explain how I would want to see it. So that was one where we worked really together to try to find a way that we would both understand what was in his mind and what he wanted to hear.
Okay. Speaking about the works that you've performed, I have watched, and in fact, in one of the interviews, the interview with Grace Bernard, who you mentioned earlier, I've listened to her, the performances of her works, the two works that you performed. So well done. They're quite beautiful, and well done to her as well. Where can the viewers and anybody interested find the other works or all of the performances of these African composers that you've done?
This is all on a playlist on YouTube called Bassoon Music from Africa. And I have uploaded it so that it plays straight through just like the live recital would. So if you begin with the first video, which is Tafika 2 by Peter Nibuto, you hear that piece, and then it immediately goes into the next piece. And that's the order how I have it on the recital as it is now. The videos also include the composer speaking at the beginning. Those who did provide spoken introductions, those are included too. So you really do, on that playlist, hear what it would be like to have it live. And it's called Bassoon Music from Africa.
Bassoon Music from Africa. Okay, on YouTube. Thank you. Let's talk generally now, because you've worked, around the music from Africans. So with some African composers, you've done a lot of research, you've traveled. I won't talk about the countries you've traveled to yet. We'll talk about that later and the work you do. But what have you learned generally since you started working with composers from different parts of Africa? What are the topics you might want to pick up on and highlight here during today's conversation?
I've learned that the musical traditions and the musical styles are incredibly vast, and there is so much variety and so much like difference to be celebrated across the continent. In the US, we're so guilty of lumping all of Africa together into one country. And I hope that my recital captures what I've learned, which is that there is so much different variety going on. The fact that this recital can have a song like Grace's alongside a piece that uses scary, kind of like evil bassoon sounds that you've never heard before, that are these extended techniques, that I think speaks to the vast variety that exists. I think that's my biggest takeaway. I mean, the other part is just that this wasn't something that I necessarily learned from doing this, but I hope that my audiences learn, which is just that we need to be so much better about how we portray artists in Africa in the US, and how we speak about them, present their music, and making sure that it's in a respectful, responsible way. I hope that that's something my audience has learned from doing this. And I'm learning how to do that best also.
Okay. Is this not something that practically everyone who is involved in music is a little bit guilty of? Because we hear every once in a while people talk about the great masters of music, the great composers. They are effectively being put forward as the standard, and this is the standard and that is it. So perhaps it's not something that's peculiar to the USA. Perhaps it is something that all of us need to adjust to. We need to stop saying, these are the ones to deal with. Yeah, we push them forward. Leave everybody else. Don't worry about it.
Probably. I don't want to just trash the way we do things in the US. I don't. Yeah. But absolutely. And that's, again, something I hope that this speaks against.
Okay. Yeah, because I have heard stories. For example, there was somebody who posted something online. Someone posted something online some years ago on Facebook. He said they were going to perform Handel's works. I think it's the Hallelujah chorus, which anybody and everybody somehow knows how to perform or to sing, where I come from. I mean, many people, if you go to a church, or especially a Catholic church, you kind of know the Hallelujah chorus, even if it's just how to hum it, you know. And he said one day they were about to prepare to perform Handel's works, and a priest walked in and basically said, no, sing something else. So it's almost like what you are doing, but from a different direction, so to speak. But yes, and he posted it online. I think he was really saddened by it, and he started asking questions about who is the authority and who should decide what should be performed. Is it me, the choir leader? Is it the director? Is it the priest? Is it, you know? And there was a lot of feedback. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that I think there are challenges everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important to highlight. And that's kind of good to hear that this is kind of a universal challenge that everyone's trying to figure out.
Yes. So now that we've talked about the effort that you are putting in, there's a bit of it, there's a tricky, I don't know, I'll see how you manage it, topic that I would like to raise very quickly. How does a non-African avoid being boxed into this label, this group? How do you avoid being described as a gatekeeper or having the gaze of an outsider, where what you pronounce, what you proclaim, becomes the extent of what the continent has to offer? The continent being Africa.
I don't know. And I hope that's a question that I would kind of lean on my collaborators to help me answer. I think it would, if I tried to answer that myself, it would make me even more of a gatekeeper. So I think the answer is to be as collaborative as possible. I want to be mostly a listener so that I know what to do and what is right, and to fill the need that my collaborators are telling me is a need instead of what I decide is a need or what I decide is important. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay, I don't know the answer either. I mean, the question wasn't posed to me, but if I was asked, I wouldn't probably put forward an answer. But what I want to make clear from how you've answered, I think I've got the impression that you probably are thinking that the accusation is being made. Absolutely not, unless somebody has already
Hmm.
said it. From our perspective, from my perspective, that's not true. I think that's why I framed it in that way. I said, how does one avoid that? Because I've
Yeah.
noticed in certain parts, in some Western countries, there are these accusations that fly around about people who are gatekeepers and
Hmm.
how they don't allow other voices to be heard. And I just thought, well, you are doing this work. How will you avoid these accusations coming up? I think one good thing is you didn't commission a 7 composers, 8 works and stop. You didn't
Hmm.
stop the conversation. You
Hmm.
did not speak for them. You allowed their voices to be heard. It's all about making sure you are not boxed in.
Yeah.
I remember when a British lady went to an African country and carried an African child, took a photograph, put it on Instagram. One British journalist. She's a very well-known investigative journalist, in fact, and she makes documentaries. And there was a hullabaloo around what she did. So later on, I found the post online of a different group that works somewhere else in Africa, and they always post pictures of models from Africa with body painting. And I challenged them. I said, as long as you can get the privacy approval of these models, perhaps give us their names as well. Don't just post their photographs, because you will be accused of doing what that British journalist did.
Right.
You'll be accused of going to take what you want and not even caring about the individual. So I think
Yeah.
I'm trying to preempt you, make sure that you say, listen, no. But it's fatiguing. You cannot continue to defend yourself if you're doing things from a position of, I just want to do what is good. Why do
Right.
I need to defend myself? So,
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying was your suggestion to them. What it was exactly what I tried to do. That's why I don't speak in the recital, and I make sure the only voices that are heard are theirs. Um, I do absolutely whenever I can say their names, and these composers are individuals who are my friends now. So yeah, I always wanted to make sure that whatever I was, since I am in a way inherently kind of a gatekeeper, that the information that I was showing was at least positive and upholds the people who I worked with.
okay, and accurate, brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Yeah, that's difficult for so for some gatekeepers, or for some people, they take
Mhm.
what they want and ignore the rest, and so the story becomes half of a story. So that's really difficult to do.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
not going to say well done or bad job, because I'm not the standard here. I just want to get the
Mhm.
answers from you. But well done for what the
Mm.
work that you do anyway. Well done for that. Um, let's talk about your interest in Pokemon.
Good, good.
What's happening? I have observed that you have quite an interest in Pokemon. Are you happy
Yeah.
to talk about that?
So I this is like I'm always trying to focus on music and school, and I'm very focused and I work very hard, and I get this thing. I have this game that completely escapes all of that. It's the thing I do for fun and for nonsense and for silliness. And I think my proudest story around Pokemon is actually related to a trip to Africa. I went to Rwanda to perform in the Ubuntu Arts Festival, and the whole time, again, I worked very hard, and we were building this play, and it was exhausting. But I always made time to like find Wi-Fi wherever I could, so I could play the game. And there was this one Pokemon called Tropius that I really wanted to get because it's only in Africa. The only place it exists is in Africa. And so I worked hard to try to find it all over the city of Kigali. I couldn't find it until boarding the flight
Oh
to
gosh.
leave back to the US. And this popped up in my game, and I captured it, and my whole team was celebrating with me. Everybody was happy, and it was one of the best moments.
Well done. That's so good. That's such a moving story. Fantastic. I'm glad you found Tropius, the Pokemon that you
Yeah,
needed. Good.
yeah,
Oh, that's beautiful. Sorry. I just thought I would like us to talk about that because it's quite prominent, in your timeline.
yeah.
Um, speaking of speaking of the journeys that you've made, you mentioned three other countries earlier. I caught Tanzania, Haiti, and I can't remember the third one. But I've noticed that you also do some work in Rwanda. Tell us about, and you just mentioned Rwanda, in fact. Tell us about your interest in Rwanda and in the country's not too distant history. So the recent history, in fact.
Last July, I went with a group of artists from New York to Kigali, where the Ubuntu Arts Festival happens. And we partnered with a theater troupe in Kigali to basically write an original play that commemorated and remembered the 25th anniversary of the genocide. It was a big year for remembrance and for reconciliation and trauma and recovery. It was a huge year, and so they had us come to collaborate on a play that focused on that. We wrote a 60-minute play together over the span of 2 weeks. And I helped write some of the music that went into it, and I performed as both an actor and a musician in this piece. So
you are a composer.
I guess so. I don't like saying that.
Oh.
I mean, yeah, that is true. You caught me. It was improvisatory, so it was a lot of improvising. It was a lot of rearranging tunes that already existed. It was like taking fragments of tunes that existed and having that become something new. And that was the music that made up this play. And then, so that was last year, that was 2019 as part of the festival. And this year they're doing the festival essentially online because of the global pandemic. So I actually proposed to have them broadcast the recital that I've been talking about today, and they'll be broadcasting that eventually between now and July. I'm not sure when, but that's like the next performance of the recital.
Oh, fantastic. So keep in touch. Tell us, how it goes and how we can get involved, in fact.
Sure.
So, I mean, talk about your experience there. I guess besides what you went to work on, setting things up, meeting people, learning, I guess, new words from the language to perform, or what were the words of the music in and the play?
Yeah. First of all, the languages that we were using, there were many. A lot of the songs were in Kinyarwanda, so we had an amazing singer named Peace doing a lot of the vocals, and he was in charge of doing songs from Rwanda. And I would help with instrumentals and help him support his voice.
Okay.
And that project was a really good exercise in understanding, like, being a gatekeeper and understanding how to be a listener and how to help my collaborators do what they needed, instead of me trying to assume too much or like trying to give something that wasn't needed. It was a really good, since we've talked about that already, that was a good moment for that. And it was completely life-changing to try to tell the stories of genocide, something that I have no experience in, luckily, and try to help my collaborators do that in a respectful, accurate way. It was completely transformative and an experience I still cherish.
Okay, and you talked about working in Tanzania, I believe in Haiti, and somewhere else. I don't remember the name of the country now. How was your experience in these countries? What did you do when you went there?
So my organization, Tradewinds Ensemble, that teaches composition and teaches songwriting to children. We have worked in Nairobi and in Arusha. And and this is also, I think, the brightest part of my career is my work with Tradewinds Ensemble, because again, it's another time to think about being a gatekeeper and doing things responsibly. That's why we use songwriting, because we know that we want to be teaching music and giving children a space to be creative with music, but to just teach them the traditions that we come from would be irresponsible. And so instead, we help them find ways to express their own voice and compose their own original music. So I guess that kind of makes me a composer too, if I'm teaching children how to be composers.
Okay. So I understand what you're saying now, okay? Because I was thinking you go to work with children to teach them your music. No, you go to work with them to encourage them to write music.
Exactly.
That's interesting from such a, especially since you said children, so they're quite young. So that's good to start that early. Mm-hmm. Right. Let's look at, you commission works. You said you've commissioned different composers. I've listened to the works of one of them. You performed the works of Grace Bernard for the bassoon. Do you commission works from other parts of the world as well?
I have colleagues and friends from the US who I am always working with to commission new music. It's something I've done across my career and will do forever. I think a lot of composers are scared to write for the bassoon or avoid it because it's kind of a scary instrument to write for. It's not it's a lot of people don't know much about it or have never played it, which if you've played piano, you know how to write for piano. If you've played violin, you know very well how to write for violin because you've felt it and you know the challenges of it. But not many people have played the bassoon. So it takes a lot of collaboration to work with a bassoonist to figure out what works best and what sounds best. So a lot of people in the US, a lot of my friends have approached me because they want to try to figure out the bassoon and how to write for it. But it's something I do all the time. I always want to add pieces to the repertoire, and I always want to perform them multiple times so that they can be celebrated far and wide.
Okay, and you did say we can talk about this. You are commissioning new works. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be performed, what is it, in July, I think?
It was supposed to be. I'm not sure what that looks like now, but it will happen when we know what the world is going to be like.
Okay. But you can talk about that a bit. The fact that you are commissioning new works. So it's not that she's commissioned works for African composers and stopped. So tell us about what the ongoing project, if you want to.
Yeah, well, the idea of this recital was that I hope that it will continue to grow so that it's not just one recital. I want this to be something I can pull from them to do a really long recital, or sometimes I leave certain works out so that it's a good length, or I just always want to have this large catalog of pieces that I can pull from and that I can share with everyone. So right now, I've asked Emmanuel Kagondi from Tanzania to write a piece, so he's working on something. And then a really famous, amazing composer named Edewede. I don't know if you know her, but she
I was not expecting. Sorry, everybody, go on.
But she's got something in the works for me.
Okay.
So that's what's coming up next, and I'm not sure when the premiere of those will happen, but it will be sometime soon. It was supposed to be on a trip to this summer. I was going to go to Nairobi, and I was going to have Peter, the composer who I commissioned, he was going to come, and I would do the full recital and premiere your piece and premiere Emmanuel's piece. And then I was supposed to go to Kampala to see Job and give the recital there, and then Tanzania also. So I don't know if that will happen, but it will happen eventually, but I'm just not sure when. But we'll get a premiere in, and I can't wait to see what you are working on.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I have to say that here. Thank you. That was a surprise. I was not expecting you to say that. Thank you. Thanks a lot, though. I really mean that. Thanks, and for the support you show to other composers as well. So yes, we hope that it happens in the not too distant future. And we hope that everyone stays healthy and things improve very, very soon, sooner rather than later. I hope you are coping well during this period as we bring the interview to a close. We just have a few more minutes. It's supposed to be 45 minutes long, but I'll just ask, how are you doing? Coping well during this time?
I'm doing well, and I feel so lucky to be doing well. I'm really enjoying the time to myself to be in charge of my own schedule. I'm enjoying the time with my instrument to spend time with it in a way. Usually if I'm preparing for a lot of things, I'm kind of like defensively working on practicing just to survive and meet the demands. But now without those demands, I'm working on what I want to work on, which is why I started the music that I'm doing in the first place. So I feel lucky to be doing well.
Okay, brilliant. It's good to hear that. Thank you very much, Midori Sampson. Thanks for your time. Thank you to everyone who watched us live and to anybody who will watch this interview later. I really appreciate it, Midori, and we hope you keep in touch with us, and we stay in touch and follow each other's activities. You have where our Facebook page is, African Composers, and the website is at africancomposers.com. And yes, we wish you success with your future endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.